Okay, hi everybody. It is Monday, and it is exactly 1 o'clock. We are back on some kind of schedule, and it's time for Pirkei Avot History and Hashkafa, brought to you or sponsored by the it's Tel Aviv International Synagogue under the inspired leadership of Rabbi Ariel Constantine. We are deep in the 9 days leading up to Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av, of course, is going to be delayed today. It falls on Shabbat. We'll be observing it, marking it on Sunday. I'm not sure if the discussion that we're going to be doing today is related or not. I leave that to you to decide. I think we are going to. It's going to take us 2 weeks to get through this. The last, really the last phrase in the Mishnah before we continue. I'll remind you that we are discussing the 11th Mishnah in the 3rd chapter of Pirkei Avot, which is attributed to a 2nd century rabbi who lived in Eretz Israel, whose name was Eliezer Modai, apparently from the town of Modi'in. And as I mentioned, I think last week, 2 weeks ago, the Modi'in that from which he hailed is approximately the same location, although obviously a lot smaller than the present city of Modi'in, on the way between Yerushalayim and Tel Aviv. So, what did he say? He said the following: he put together a whole bunch of nefarious activities, nefarious actions, in order to reach a bottom line, which we will get to presently. Hamachalel et HaKadoshim, a person who desecrates that which is holy, he who makes light of, or desecrates, or humiliates, or makes fun of the holidays. Hamal bin Panei Chaveiro Barabim, a person who humiliates his friend in public, or his fellow in public. Mefer Brito Shel Avram Avinu, a person who violates the covenant of Abraham, which we saw refers to reverse circumcision, or in contemporary times we could actually say a person who advocates for the abolition of the circumcision of 8-year-old males. Alav Shalom. V'megale panim b'Torah shelo k'halacha, a person who interprets. Megale panim really means to expose or to reveal sides, but it really means interpret. B'Torah shelo k'halacha, inappropriately, in a way that's not authentic, in a way that is distortive, in a way that is false, in a way that is you get the point. Even though such a person is quite learned, and he does good deeds, and he has done a lot of mitzvot in his life, ein lo chelek l'olam haba, such a person has no place in the world to come. He chucks it. He loses it. So we're going to have to ask, what is it about all of these things? And they're not all together. Each one separately leads to this horrendous end, meaning that you won't have a place in the world to come. When you die, that'll be it. But before we get to that, we need to discuss the last of the tropes here, the last inappropriate activity, which is hamegale panim shebat Torah shelo k'halacha. What does that mean? To misinterpret the Torah. If there was ever, I know that's not true. This parsha actually, this mission is actually loaded with examples of one of the underlying methodological aspects that I've talked about over the course of the past, 2 years that we've been meeting like this, and that is that in one of the most amazing and most fetching things I think about Pirkei Avot is the fact that it, on the one hand, it's straightforward. On the other hand, every generation and every historical situation and every different person sees the statements differently. So yes, it has original context, but nevertheless, it speaks differently to every single age, because every single age has different challenges which seem to be related to by the words of the sages of old, and that's a perfectly legitimate. That's a perfectly legitimate activity, because Torah is timeless, and the statements of Pirkei Avot, of the rabbis, are timeless, and therefore one sees different aspects and different manifestations thereof in in the words. So, what I'm going to do today is take a look at different ways that commentators have seen this statement. What does it mean? In other words, defining what does it mean to misinterpret the Torah. And then next week I'm going to do something which I generally don't do, and that is I have my own contemporary take on what Megalet Panim B'Torah Shelo K'Halacha means, and we're going to talk about that. Then. So let's start. Interestingly, when I want to know what Rabbi Eliezer Modai likely had in mind when he made his statement in the 3rd century, I usually go to, as I think I've mentioned, the wonderful commentary on the Mishnah in general and on Avot in particular by my friend Professor Zev Safrai. I think the set's almost done. It's an historical, philological, and ethical commentary on the entire Mishnah, but here in terms of Avot, and it always puts things in its context. If I remember correctly, I may be wrong, but I believe that the entire commentary has been uploaded either to one of two websites. It's either been uploaded to alhatorah.org, alhatorah.org, which is an amazing site, Torah site, put together by Hillel Novetsky. And the other one is Safaria. I don't remember which one has it. I believe it is Ala Torah, but I may be wrong. Either way, you can check it. It's 2 clicks. But it's instantly accessible to you, and it's a wonderful, wonderful resource for learning in general and for Divrei Torah in particular. So I learned to look at him, and he doesn't tell us. I was really struck. He doesn't really tell us to whom Rabbi Eliezer, who he thinks Rabbi Eliezer ben Hamodai was referring. He gives a few possibilities, and maybe he's referring to all of them. One of the things about what does it mean for us? It means misinterpreting the Torah. So that can be seen as something of a how shall I put this? Something of a relative kind of thing. In other words, if I am a rabbi and I am a believer in Torah Shabbal Peh and I have a specific tradition, and I believe that tradition, as Orthodox Jews do, is the authentic one going back to Sinai. So anybody who disagrees with me is Megalet Panim B'Torah Shelo K'Halacha. And in the time of the Second Temple, and even in the time after the Second Temple, when there were still schismatics floating around, or other groups floating around, it was very likely that he was referring to those people that don't agree with the rabbinic tradition, such as those who lived in Qumran, the Dead Sea sects, the ones who were popularly called Essenes. They lived their life according to the Torah, but the way they interpreted the Torah was way different than anything any rabbi did. And he may have been referring to them. Now, they were very, the people from Qumran, the Essenes, were very attractive spiritual individuals. They were white, and they were very strict about purity, and they had all kinds of different, very interesting and sort of unusual interpretation of the Torah. And he's saying, no, that's very nice, but that it's not. Those are that you can misinterpret any text you want. Our saying Rabbi Eliezer Modai, I am saying that only that which is authorized and which is legitimized by the oral law and the traditional rules by which the Torah is interpreted. Anything else is Megalet Tanim B'Torah Shelo K'Halacha. And it certainly makes sense. There are Sadducees still floating around, and they apparently had some connection with the Essenes. Also, Megalet Tanim B'Torah Shelo K'Halacha. One could even this is not something that Safrai mentions, but I think it suggests itself. Look at, ladies and gentlemen, it's easy to use this statement polemically. In other words, you could be 2 rabbis, right? 2 of them sitting there and yelling at each other. You're Megalet Panim. The so-and-so gives an interpretation. And you say, you're Megalet Panim B'Torah Shelo K'Halacha. Now, you're totally off. Now, when it's used polemically within the context of a rabbinic discussion, I think it's used just sort of like as a throwaway. I don't think anybody would be. If two rabbis disagree on a point, I don't think the other one thinks that he's not going to have a place in the world to come. At least I would hope not. It's got to be a certain amount of the Judaism has to have the Torah study has a certain amount of intense polemic and also a certain amount of collegiality. I know that sometimes that's hard to believe, but yeah, collegiality is part of the story. So that is what that one of those is most likely the initial meaning or the original meaning or the original intent of what Rebbe Lezer Hamodai had in mind. Note, I would add that from what everything else I've checked, it's pretty clear that the consideration was legal misinterpretation. Okay. In other words, how do you determine, for example, there's the famous argument between the Sadducees and the Pharisees about when does Shavuot fall? The Torah says Mimocharat HaShabbat. You start counting 50 days after the Shabbat, whatever that is, and on the 50th day is Shavuot. So there is a famous discussion, famous dispute between Sadducees and Pharisees, and also among some of the sectarians in the Judean desert in the Second Temple period. How do you interpret that? So the accepted rabbinic interpretation is that in this case the word Shabbat really doesn't refer to the Sabbath when something comes every 7 days, but rather the holy day. In general, the festivals are also called Shabbatot Hashem, days on Sabbaths of the Lord, days on which one is shovet, one ceases, one abstains from work. So therefore, the rabbinic tradition has it, Talmud, and that's the way that Jews do act until today. You start counting on the first day after the first day of Chol Hamoed Pesach. In other words, the first day after the first holiday of Pesach. 50 days, on the 50th day, 49 days you count, that's Sfirat HaOmer, and then you count, then the 50th day is Shavuot. So in other words, so Shavuot, according to rabbinic tradition, always falls on the same date. However, the Sadducees said no, Shabbat means Shabbat. Shabbat means, for those of you who are Ashkenazi inclined, Shabbos. So when do you start counting? You start counting on the day after Shabbat Chol HaMoed. In other words, the first Shabbat in Pesach, because that's the context of the discussion, Pesach is the context, that's when you start. In other words, the first day always has to be a Sunday, and it's whatever Sunday Chol Hamoed Pesach is, that's when you start. So that the date of Shavuos actually can flow, but it has a few different dates upon which it can. So that is a debate based on the interpretation of verses. And nevertheless, that's megalepa. If you accept the Sadducean opinion, then that is megalep panim b'Torah shelo kahalacha. And I think the emphasis here in the wording of the Mishnah is kahalacha, that we're talking about law. When we get to the Middle Ages, things begin to get a little bit more interesting. Rashi, for example, the commentary attributed to Rashi that claims to be the commentary on Avot was not by Rashi. It apparently was written. It emanates from a German Jewish from a German Beit Midrash, not a French one. Yeah, but it doesn't matter because the sentiment that is preserved there reflects a social and religious reality that is certainly common to both the French and the German parts of Ashkenazic Jewry. And Rashi, or that pseudo Rashi, let's call it, says that Misha Doresh Ba'agadot Shel Dofi. He quotes Gemara. A person who interprets legends, false legends. What does that mean? So according to Rashi, this refers to people who ridicule. the Torah, who ridicule Bichlal in general, Judaism, but certainly who ridicule the Torah. There's so much stuff in the Torah that's irrelevant, and who needs it, this is dumb, and all kinds of unfortunate statements made about the Torah. Now, we all experience, anybody who's involved in Jewish life knows that you encounter, a lot of the times you encounter people who make statements like that. But that's in the modern era where skepticism is God. Skepticism is skepticism and worse is the norm. In the 11th century, or 12th century, actually 12th century, in Germany and France, what kind of skeptics were there? Even the Christians were reverent vis-a-vis the Bible and vis-a-vis religion. So I'm not aware of a problem of skepticism in Ashkenaz. However, it is true that already in Rashi's time, the Catholic Church, one of the lines of argument that the Catholic Church undertook in order to be able to undermine Jewish life was to ridicule Jewish interpretations of the Bible, and instead to argue that the proper way of interpreting the Bible is Christologically. One of the really the point the major point by which caused one of the major points of division and hostility between Jews and Christians from almost from the very beginning was really not about, at least the first point was not about the question of who murdered Jesus or who killed Jesus, who turned Jesus over to the Romans, but rather the question was, to whom does the Torah belong? Because Christianity is what is called a supersessionist religion. In other words, following Paul, for example, basically that with the coming of Jesus, the Jews were rejected. The Jews should have disappeared. We didn't do that. That's part of the problem. And the Torah actually belongs to Christianity. But Torah is, in fact, a Christian book. But how do you do that? How do you know? If you read the Bible, you don't get the sense that it's a Christian book. So there's a huge literature of reinterpretation of the Torah, which shows, or which attempts to show, that behind the written word, there are myriads of Christian meanings and hints, and so on, to show that really, at the end of the day, Christianity is the real Judaism, and the old Judaism is passé, and the Jews should go away, and so on and so forth. And they would ridicule Jewish interpretations. First of all, in order to ridicule the enemy, and second of all, in order to be able to say, look how stupid your religion is, look how smart our religion is. So it's a double-edged sword to achieve the same effect. So if that's the case, so Hamigaleh Panim B'Torah Shelo K'Halacha, a person who interprets the Torah inappropriately or incorrectly or maliciously in a maliciously wrong way, even if he has Torah mitzvahs, in other words, even if we're talking about an apostate here, who grew up religious or grew up with an education but became a Christian, and he says that's not going to save you because you're basically distorting and undermining the Torah. That, I think, is a reasonable way to interpret that comment. Maimonides, who is usually closer to the simple meaning of the text, and we're talking about now life in Egypt. So that's Germany in the 11th, 12th century, or France. Here we're talking about Egypt in the 12th century. Maimonides, when he gets to when he discusses Megaleh Panim B'Torah Shelo K'Halacha, he ignores the interpretation of Torah. I have no idea why he does this. Okay, but he ignores the question of interpretation, and he says, "No, Hamegaleh Panim B'Torah Shelo K'Halacha. This is a person who openly and brazenly violates the Torah." There's Hamegaleh Panim B'Torah Shelo K'Halacha, meaning I'm going to sit there and I'm going to stick it to the Torah. I interpret. Yeah, I understand what it says, but I'm gonna be mechalel Shabbat. I'm gonna eat whatever the case might be. I'm gonna do anything I can. Megalep Gilui Panim usually means brazen, arrogant, aggressive behavior. Why that? Why what problem there was in terms of Jews not keeping the Torah in the 12th century in Egypt? I have no idea. I can't. But that's what he says. That's what he says. Now we know a lot of people that here's a word that never the kids is intranslatable. People who do dafka, they do going to do it just because of. All right, say. Um, strikingly, I was surprised at Maimonides' interpretation for the simple reason that there's an obvious, especially in his lifetime, there was an obvious target for the barbs of this Mishnah, and that is the Karaites. The Karaites, who were the Jewish alternative for hundreds and hundreds of years. It starts to form. It's not a unified movement, but as a phenomenon, starts in the 8th century, and there are still Karaites today, although they're minuscule group of people. But at one time, they made up like 40% of the Jewish people. The Karaites, the obvious people to quote, and I don't understand why Maimonides, and Maimonides spent so much of his life fighting against Karaites. He doesn't mention it. Karaites were the Karaite movement, which is made up of all kinds of sub movements and all kinds of stuff. Basically said we reject the oral law. We reject rabbinic tradition. We are going to live only according to what is written in the Bible. And if something's not explicit in the Bible, only by really, really conservative, I think you'd call it, I'm not a lawyer, strict constructionist, literalist understanding of the implications of the words. Okay? And the truth is that this approach attracted a lot of attention and a lot of adherents in the throughout the Middle Ages. They were a serious influence on other Jews, and rabbis from the start spent hours and hours, and it's not just in the Middle East, it was in Spain and southern Italy and God knows where, and in Russia, fighting against the Karaites, which is an interesting position. The popularity of the Karaites, who, for example, sat in the dark, or still sit in the dark on Friday night, because it says you shouldn't have fire going on Shabbat. We say that the word Shabbat, that don't burn fire means don't light fire, but you can have light burning. The word levaer can bear the interpretation of either lighting or having something being lit, as like a gerund burning. People were attracted to this, maybe because of its authenticity. Maybe they didn't like rabbis. It's all kinds of different theories. One of the striking things about Karaism is it is the only form of Reform Judaism that is stricter and harder to observe than rabbinic Judaism with the oral law. So people sometimes want it, as my wife always says. Sometimes people want the chumrah. They want to be stricter. In any event, but Maimonides doesn't mention that. That's the obvious group. And Sajagon and others do mention those who really were professional anti-Karaite fighters do mention them as among those of Megaleb Panim B'Torah Shelo Kahalacha. As time goes on, and as the intellectual and religious challenges facing the Jewish people change, then what happens is you get a lot more nuanced definitions of who these people are, because, as I said, the challenges change. So, for example, Rabbi Avadia Bartanura, who by himself is a very interesting person. He came from Bartanura in central Italy. He himself was Italian. Italy at the time had three major Jewish communities. There were the Italiani, the descendants of Italian Jews who'd been there forever and ever, French Jews who came from the north, and German Jews who came from the northeast. He traveled to the north to study with a French rabbi. His name was Rabbi Joseph Colon, about whom I wrote my doctorate. I'm writing a book. And then in 1488, he decided he was, of course, the famous author of one of the most famous commentaries on the Mishnah that is still learned studied today. In 1488, he made Aliyah. He moved to Jerusalem. He was responsible for the reestablishment and the flourishing of the Jerusalem Jewish community. He was considered, until he died, to be really the preeminent rabbinic and communal authority in Eretz Israel. But he was very much he was raised in a very Renaissance Italian kind of atmosphere, which means that you can. I mean, other things he was open to. He apparently open to other sciences and things like that. Which means that one would wonder when one gets to his comment whether he what do you have in mind? I mean, what maybe his background in Renaissance Italy has implications or has echoes of Jewish life in Italy, and in fact, I think it does. He says, "Hamegale panim b'Torah shelo kahalacha" means don't shade the truth. Don't hide, for purposes of apologetics, the real meaning of the Torah. And he quotes an interesting pasuk. The pasuk says, "Ve'et zaracha lo titen lavir lamolech." Don't cause your children to be brought over to Molech. Now, Molech is okay. So there was a Canaanite Moabite. There was a Canaanite Aramean god whose name was Melech or Malk. The Torah calls it Molech because the what's the word, vowels. The pronunciation of Molech is the same as Boshet, humiliation. The Torah, in general, Tanakh likes to call various false gods, various pagan gods, Boshet, humiliation or dishonor. Sometimes, if you have a person, for example, name is Eshbaal, for whatever reason, Jews started calling God Baal. Baal, of course, is the name of one of the major gods of Canaan. It would be like Hungarians like to say Ishtanem, oh God, but Ishtanem was a pagan god of the Magyars. So they either Ishboshet, the son of Saul, was really named Eshbaal, but Tanakh called the Navi calls him, the prophet calls him Ishboshet not because he himself was a humiliating person, but we want to say something bad about. There's a mitzvah to say bad things about Avodah Zarah, about pagan gods. Or what you do is you take the letters of the vowels of Boshet and you apply it to a god. So here Molech is really Boshet when its real name was Malk or Milkom or something like that, something about the king. In any case, they used to sacrifice living children to and in the fire of Molech. It was a horrible thing. And in fact, it was apparently very popular god because they even in the worst days of the first temple, there were shrines for Molech in the Hinnom Valley. And it's one of the reasons why it's called Gay Hinnom. The Hinnom Valley it became the word for hell because of the fires and the children screaming and the horrific things that would be done in the name of Molech. Anyways, so the Torah says don't do that. I mean, it's one of the 36 things for which it's a capital crime, and there's 36 things for which your soul is cut off and whatever. There were those who translated it as don't give your child la'armiuta. Don't give your child over to non-Jews. Why is that an issue? Okay, so I see we're at the end of the time. I'm going to have to leave you with that, and I'll have to answer that next time. Leave you with a question, and you can be dazzled. So we will meet next week at that same time, same place, and I will finish our little review, and then I will tell you what I think in 2022, Megalet Panim Shalok Halacha really means. In the meantime, you're welcome to leave comments below. Please be welcome to share the share the video, and Sunday is Tisha B'av. Let's hope there isn't a Tisha B'av. Maybe the Mashiach will come in the meantime, and if not, have a gringer tanas, as they used to say. Have an easy fast to give you a chance to feel the fast, but not enough to be able to prevent you from contemplating the meaning of the day. And as we say here in Israel, B'minyan Yerushalayim Ninucham, may we be comforted in the building of Jerusalem.